We are so very honored to be speaking with Lorís Simón Salum today on the show. I wanted to take a moment to introduce you to her and her work. She is a psychotherapist based in Houston, Texas. She began her journey of self-discovery with the Marion Woodman Foundation and its Body Soul Rhythms retreats. With a lifelong inclination towards symbolism, imagery, and the unconscious, she pursued a graduate degree in clinical mental health counseling and advanced training in dream psychology, sandtray therapy, Jungian depth psychology, and neurofeedback. Over the years, she has worked in both inpatient and outpatient settings, supporting individuals facing depression, anxiety, trauma, ADHD, addictions, mood disorders, psychotic disorders, and more. In 2013, she released her documentary film Ensoulment, a diverse analysis of the feminine in Western culture, portraying a road to self-discovery through the tangles of Jungian theory, cultural narratives, and personal intuition. An internationally award-winning film that screened across countries and numerous cities. And then in 2017, she published a book by the same title, which presents the complete interviews from the film, as well as additional experts who formed part of her theoretical understanding of the feminine. We found Lorís's work through our connection to Dr. Catherine Svela, who is a mentor and a scholar, and she hosts a podcast called Myth Matters. And we met Dr. Svela through our mutual friend, Kelly Scar. And as we were preparing for Dr. Svela's interview, I was very drawn to her conversation with you, Lorís, and it was about the screening of your film Ensoulment. And when I heard that conversation, I went to the internet and I searched for this film. I was like, I have to see this film. I watched it. I sent it to Jennifer. I said, Jennifer, you have to watch this film. This is everything that we've been talking about. And Jennifer watched it, and we reached out to you, and we're so very glad and honored that you agreed to have a conversation with us today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Teresa and Jennifer. I am very happy to be here, and it's not always that I get the opportunity to visit that time in my life. I carry it with me, but it kind of begins to decrease in proportion with other things that happen. And so it's always, I don't know, it's a blast from the past, kind of a fun adventure. So thank you.
Absolutely. In the film, you talk a little bit about why you're exploring the feminine. And I wonder if you can just take us back to that time frame about where the feminine arose for you and why it became something that you wanted to understand better.
Yes. So for me, that story began around, or rather, it began to formalize when I was about 19 years old. That's whenever my mother first took me to one of the Marion Woodman Foundation's retreats, and they were the Body Soul Rhythms retreats. And that's when I first heard about the feminine. At that time, I didn't really understand what that was. I was just in a circle of women who were significantly older than I was. I think at this point I'm reaching the one of the youngest members' age at that time, and I reached out to her and I was like, crazy. So there was a significant age gap, and so a lot of older women talking about myth, dancing, drawing, making masks. It was all just everything that I needed. Um, But it was a lot. It was a lot to translate into whatever phase I was in. I was a teenager. I was still dealing with teenage things. Um, and so it took a couple of years of digesting. I graduated college, and then I just hit this crossroads where I said, do I either go back to school and do, go to grad school and do the typical path, or do I go into film? Because these two were always um, two important interests of mine. And I was in a coffee shop with my mom, and she said, "Well, why don't you make a documentary about the feminine?" And so, or I think she said about women, and I said, "Absolutely, that's a great idea." And so I started to fall back on everything that I had learned with these women, but this time from a different, maybe a little bit more of a mature stance. I went deeper into, well, what the hell does this mean? What does it mean for me? Why is this so important to me? And that's when I started untangling. All right, this isn't necessarily about women. It is, and it isn't. And then the film began. It was about a 2 year um, journey that I was very lucky to be able to do that, to have the space to just sit down and read and research and really have the time to unfold in the way that I needed to for the film. So that's one of the things that was one of the best parts. That although looking back, I think everyone who does anything looks back, and there's a sometimes a little bit of a cringe of like, I could have said that differently, but in that time, one of the things that I remember most was that I did everything that I explored every corner that I knew of at that time, so that I wouldn't feel that years later. And I think in that sense, I succeeded because I have that core memory of, no, I really looked everywhere I could at whatever, in whatever was accessible for a 20 something year old, knowledge wise, or even just capacity wise. So that's how that started. Was that the question? Because,
Yes.
okay.
Yes. 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 I mean, it's funny because I'll just share anecdotally, when I was maybe 38, I don't know, I don't remember exactly. I was late 30s, and I went to India, and I went to an Ayurvedic doctor, and long story short, he said to me I needed more feminine energy. That was my problem. And I took that offensively because I thought he was trying to tell me how to be more like a woman, and that he was projecting on me his idea of what a woman should be, soft and gentler and all of these things. And that that like friction that I had with his recommendation was the thing that launched me into exploring what the actual feminine is, and that it's not necessarily a sexual identification, that
Right.
it's, as I think of it now, it's more of an energy or an archetype. And so to think about, having found that information when I was in my teens or 20s, I definitely don't think I would have known what to do with that. So I feel it feels very fortunate that we have, really you were very wise and intuitive to be following that. And now that's what, 13, 15 years ago, to have your perspective on it now, I think will be really interesting. But before we get into more of that, I wonder if you can just talk about, because I think Jennifer and I kind of get stuck in differentiating woman from feminine. And if you can talk a little bit about your perspective on that, and whether or not it's changed, is it important for us to keep distinction between those two containers? Anything that you want to share about that would be interesting.
Yeah, it's kind of a difficult thing to talk about nowadays because of all the gender politics and everything that has been happening since the film came out. Um, but the theoretically, the root of the of where I got the whole idea from, and I think Marion Woodman also, is from Jungian psychology, from Carl Jung. And he spoke about anima and animus. And these two were certainly, he spoke about the anima as the feminine energy, feminine image within men, and the animus as the masculine energy within women. So he was alluding to opposites at that time. And I think that we have to take into account the century that this was in, where it was a very divided. These are women and these are men. Period. So to speak about opposites, I think gender was a solid point of reference. It was a solid point to begin from. Everybody knew what a woman was. Everybody knew how a man was. And so I think as that has evolved, it's gotten a lot more complicated because we have everything now. We have a spectrum. So what he was alluding to with anima was the kind of energy that brings in openness, receptiveness, creativity. It's all of the internal world of emotions, and there's a lot of movement. It's very ephemeral. It's not anything that you can grab onto. It kind of, the moment you want to catch something, it flies away. And there's a shadowy aspect to that as well, because it can get very chaotic. If you think about the internet, it's a space where there is so much democracy in voices, it becomes just noise. um, when I was making the film, I was in a point in my life where I realized I need more of the feminine energy. Now I hesitate to say feminine energy because of all of that what implies, but I think it's important to frame it within the context of what this means. Um, at that point in my life, I was very much about moving ahead, very much about having a structure that was impermeable. I needed, the structure is safety, that's solid, one, two, three, what's next is next. You see things in a way that is not confusing. But of course, I always have this image of a shell without anything inside. So I had a solid structure, but there was no soul to it. And that's where the film kind of became very important to me, to highlight feminine energy. I didn't mention so much masculine energy, but I do find it just as important, in that it's the opposite of, it is a lot of structure. It brings us hierarchy. It lets us choose, yes, I prefer this over this. This is black and this is white. We do need those qualities as well. Of course, there's the shadowy aspect to that as well. Too much of it, then we're just robotic and soulless. But we need both. Everyone has both of those energies. I think we could associate one. If I were to switch opposites between men and women, instead of using those sets of opposites, sometimes I personally think about it of inside versus outside. And whereas the outside, more physical world becomes masculine, and the inner, you can't see it. You can only feel it, becomes more feminine. So they're both very important, and we all certainly have a mix of both.
Yeah,
I like that.
oh, go ahead, Jennifer.
I like the distinction of internal and external. I think that is because we have struggled with this too, right? We came up with the feminine frequency name, but at the same time, we were like, well, how is there another word? Because it does have a lot of charge to it, right? So is there another word? And we talked to Dr. Svela about this too. And it's like, well, there's so many words, right? The creativity, the receptivity, the internal, all of these things. And so it yeah, I feel like we need a new word and a new way of being able to speak of these different principles and archetypes without that charge. But I think that your film did such a beautiful way that it broke down that it's not a gendered thing, right? Because that's the other thing that people, I think, still now have a hard time distinguishing, right, between the feminine and woman and the masculine and man. And I really appreciated the level of depth that you went into in all of the different areas and how you kind of like teased out what were the feminine principles and archetypes. And so I thought it was very, very well done and so aligned with what we try to communicate and talk to people about too. Because a lot of times, sometimes people hear feminine and they're like, oh, well, they're men haters, right? And like, there's just like so many different levels of charge with it that, yeah. So thanks for making that film.
Absolutely. No, I think what you mentioned, Jennifer, is something that I still struggle with. That it becomes very difficult when you try to find a midpoint with the other, because what may be feminine for someone else may look very different for me. And so where do we find this space where we're both seeing eye to eye and we're referring to the very same thing? At the end of the day, we have to choose a word. I mean, it's a container for the thing that we're trying to refer to. And I do think that even if we were to find a new word for it, eventually it would start to carry the same charge.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's kind of like how people have referred to different pathologies over the years. They keep changing the names because they grab these stigmas, but over time, the word ends up capturing an essence of whatever it's referring to, and it becomes charged again. And I can see the benefit of renewing, because I think the new terms do bring in different perspectives. It goes with the times. Um, but the root or the essence is also recurring. It's a hard thing to, again, very feminine. You can't capture it. It's going to keep moving. So I try to, when I refer to this, I always go to a menu and just try to express the overall idea, especially with clients, and I see what they grab onto, and then we just stick with that. Um, that has been helpful, at least in my work. But if it comes to talking about it again in a more formal project, I think I would come up against that same obstacle that I did back then.
There was a funny moment when I had sent out an email to my mailing list saying, Jennifer and I had maybe one of our first conversations about this subject matter that I'm very passionate about, and on that show, we went into all of the nuance, right, that we're talking about now, that it's an energy, it's not a sexual identity, it's not a gender, it's an energy, a principle, etc. And somebody on my mailing list sent me a scathing response, unsubscribed, and clearly hadn't listened to the show, because if he had, he would have known that we weren't talking about what he assumed we were talking about. And so when Jennifer and I saw your film, we were like, we just need to play her film for everyone. If we can just get them to sit down for, I don't remember how long it is, and just that will outline it all. And we don't have to do this show anymore and keep talking about it.
I think we would still, whenever I finished the film, there's still a lot of people that misunderstand it. And of course, there's always the question, well, was I not clear enough? In what way? But it's an interesting encounter, because I will get a good bit of women that carry pain, that carry suffering from experiences with men. And there's a lot of resentment and anger for all the right reasons. But there's this expectation for me to be like, yeah, men suck, and it's always hard for me because I receive them with open arms, and I'm so grateful that they watched the film and that they appreciated it. But it's always like, yeah, but that's not what that was about, though. I
Yeah.
hate to break it to you. You know, it's just interesting to see how people receive it, what they hear with that, because it is charged. And so it does hit you in different spots depending on what area of life you're in or what stage it is that you're going through, and especially in relation to the other, like other with a capital O, whether
Yeah.
it be men, whether it be masculine energy, whether it be whatever. Um, yeah, it's interesting to see how it hits.
Well, and that makes me think of another conversation that Jennifer and I have had is, in today's culture, there's a lot of conversation about the divine feminine and feminine rising and goddess empowerment and all of these types of things that I see as a gender conversation and not necessarily as a feminine energy or a feminine principle. And so to me, that's where I feel like I'm like a broken record where I keep trying to help people understand what my definition is of the feminine versus when you're saying divine feminine power. To me, power is more of a masculine energy. And so I wonder what your thoughts are when it comes to especially since you're talking to clients, you're folding this into your work with clients.
Right.
Is there a way that you think we could be doing this, having these conversations that helps people to distinguish? Because I think that there's a desire because of what women have been through, as you allude to, especially some of your clients who have been through hard things at the hands of men. There is a desire for women to come into their power, um, to undo the harms that they've experienced, that women have experienced historically. And I don't want to deny that, right? That I think that is an important thing that needs to happen. But to understand that that's not actually the feminine within you that's doing that work, and that kind of brings in like how we relate to the masculine, and an appreciation of a healthy masculine energy within us. So that was a long way of me sort of setting the stage about the predicament that I have and the recurrent conversation I have with folks that are talking about, divine feminine and goddess power. So when you are talking to people, is it important for you to utilize whether it's anima and animus or feminine and masculine as you're talking about the choices that they're making, about what they're doing in their life, whether it's healing or it's achievement or anything that they're seeking?
Right. Um, I will always try to refrain from bringing in theory with my clients. I almost kind of, it's, if I hear that there are themes, ongoing themes that sound very feminine, and it's a continuation that's actually bringing them stuckness, suffering, pain in any way, that's a great moment where when I do bring them in, there are these concepts. um, I try to always bring them as offerings so that they can grab onto their own way of talking about this. I do fear that I think it's very important to find the language. I mean, that is a definite, because otherwise, then what are we talking about? Then what direction are we trying to go into? Sometimes there is absolutely no direction, and that's where we need to be. Um, but usually people come in because they want to explore, right? They want to feel more, they want to get over something, heal. And so there are these tiny arrows that point us in what direction. So when I do see certain themes that it keeps going in the same way and this just isn't working anymore, I do bring it in, more so as a menu. And then we start talking in their language. Well, what is the feminine, quote unquote? What is that for you? Does that look like incredible empathy 24/7, so much so that you can't ever say no? And then we're talking about a feminine energy, but those are not exactly the words that are coming out, or vice versa, right? If everything is always, well, but this wasn't according to my plan. And all right, well, what if we didn't have a plan? Again, we're talking about feminine energy, but not in those exact words. And in that way, I find that people can understand it from an embodied stance, as opposed to like a heady, oh, this is feminine, this is masculine, and then what the hell does that mean for me? It's just something my therapist told me. It sounds cool, but then what?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it is so much about bringing it down and understanding it through experience, in your own voice.
Are you
Which I would
able?
say, sorry, go
Yeah.
ahead. I was just going to say that bringing it into the body and having your own experience with it instead of it being a theory in the mind in and of itself, to me, is a feminine way of being with it. Not to, and also not to just keep saying this is feminine, that's masculine, this is feminine, this is masculine, but that is what I think about a lot when I think about the feminine, is embodiment and coming down into your heart and your body and trusting those instincts and that intuition instead of it being just living upside in your brain and something that you read about versus experienced.
Yeah. Yes. I continue to find that I do lean in that direction. The world that we live in, it's just so it continues to be masculine, and in the primary way that we function. We bring our resumes and we want certain degrees. We want a certain amount of money. Um, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think what starts to become hurtful is when it starts to get too one-sided, and at that point it's like, well, yes, this matters, absolutely. We're not throwing virgins into a volcano and hoping that that will change the weather. Like, that's, science is beautiful in that way. um, but at the end of the day, I think in the work that I do, at least, there's always this counter, or artists also, all the artists, all the shamans, all the healers. We tend to go into the space where the majority of society is not. It's not that we don't belong to the mainstream. We absolutely do. But there is a gaze that's always turned into, but what about this other thing that also is very human? It still belongs to us. What about that? Um, so it is feminine in the embodiment, absolutely. And yet it's curious how we're speaking also about the languaging, which is more on the masculine side of differentiating. Well, yeah, but this isn't women though. Men also have this capacity and this need. Um, it's just, there's always just both. No matter where you go, there's always, you find the other. That's why I love and this was in the film, and I loved whenever we were animating it. Um, there's the yin and yang sign that comes up, and there's this reference of how there's always a little bit of the other inside the big one. And I find that through experience as well, that no matter how feminine you go, there's still some masculine, and no matter how masculine you go, you'll always find some feminine. I don't think that we can live so much in absolutes. Just, we're human, we're not made that way, or I think so.
Yeah, I have found myself stuck in a little bit of a trap of defining everything. When Jennifer and I were talking about words to use for the show, I would say, well, but that's actually masculine, and I'm like hyper analyzing everything, which is masculine also, to hyper analyze everything. And so I think it's just, I'm trying to constantly remind myself that that it is a spectrum, and to honor that. And that principle, as you're saying, is actually like the embodiment is of that is feminine, to honor the fluidity and the spectrum of these concepts. And so it makes me want to know, just from a practical perspective, you said earlier how it was, you felt it was important to understand the feminine, that you had been living in a very quote unquote masculine way of it being embodied. And so, if there are things that you can recall about the way that you started to fold the feminine more into your life, and what impact that had for you. Does that make sense?
Yeah. um, it's it's hard to recall a little bit, but
Yeah.
in terms of, I'll start here, and I'm sure it'll get me somewhere. In terms of the masculine mentality that I was in, or the aura that I was just living in all the time, my family, we are Mexican Lebanese, and it's interesting that a lot of the customs that we held were a little bit outdated. Whenever you're unrooted from a country, you there's part of your heart stays in the other place, and so you want to nurture that. You want to continue the traditions, the songs, the practices, and you want your children to learn that. But what it's a curious thing, because it gets a little bit frozen in time after a few generations. You're not actually evolving with the original culture anymore. I mean, for many, if there's still a connection, you can keep it up to date. But for my family, it wasn't so, because Lebanon is so far away. And so some of these customs became a little bit frozen in time. And one of those was a very strict gender role expectation, where men were a certain way, women were this other way. And I was in a point in my life where I was full of life. I wanted to be great at something, and the expectation out there was, well, you're a woman, so this is how you can be great at that. How about you lose some weight? How about you hit the salon, get yourself a boyfriend, look good, and have some kids? And I was like, all right, I'll do that. And as I got on that road, something in me started to shake, to collapse eventually. And I realized, all right, well, something here is not working. Well, what is this? Well, what is it that I'm feeling? What I'm following the rules. I'm doing everything I was told. Why is this not working? It's almost like a it's almost what people talk about in midlife. You hit another stage of that, of I've been working towards this all of my life, and now what? Why am I not feeling what I'm supposed to be feeling, along with these rules that came along? So then the film came along. Of course, a lot of therapy at that point, and it takes a lot of courage to say, all right, well, I guess I'm not going to do that then, but I have to tell everyone that's not what I'm doing. We all belong to, for the most, I mean, no, we're human, we're social beings, we belong to these communities, and there are dynamics, there are covert rules about how things work. So you come and you disrupt, inevitably you threaten the system, and so you become the scapegoat. So it's an incredibly challenging thing to do, and this can be super small scale, or it can be, we can talk about the macro scale of this in terms of a society. But within my own family, it was disrupting to say, yes, I'm a woman, but I don't want to wear heels anymore. And gosh, this is so tight. Why do I have to wear that? And all these little things that end up, for a family, having a member who is not following the rules whatsoever. Uh, Interesting enough, I think it took a lot of masculine energy to break through that. but there was a recognition of something in me of like, okay, this isn't the way. What now? How am I going to shape this? You know, if we think about kind of a like in the biblical reference of like, let's form something out of clay and then infuse it with life. What is this thing going to look like for me? And that was a long process. I think it did culminate in the film. I think the film was very much an expression of being a little bit on the other side. After the film, there was another collapse because, of course, anything that goes up must come down. um, but it created a baseline for me of a new way of being, a new way of combining these different energies, and to have something that literally had my voice and my image to some extent through the cartoon was profoundly healing because I created my own, at that time, it was kind of like I projected my own role model of what it was that I wanted. And that film did become somewhat of a role model to me to this day as to a way of being. Um, so I don't know. I keep forgetting if I answered the question, but I'll stop asking because I assume we're just.
Yeah, everything that you're sharing, it takes me a while to even get to the question that I'm asking, and so it's all perfect. And this is the way my brain works, but it makes me think of, you know, trying to help others understand or to accept perhaps a different way, like you working you know, in your interactions with your family to have them understand you through a different lens. And something that you said made me think about the you know, the cycles, the ups and downs. And if we take it out of our sort of like our personal lives and put it into the macro, I think of like our economies and how there's this expectation of perpetual growth and unlimited supply of resources in the earth. And it's just like take and more. And that reminds me of this real like cultural idea that that's the truth. And I personally don't believe that it's the truth. I believe that things come in cycles, and there will be a time where the economy has to come down, and while it may not be easy, that's a part of life. That's, to me, that's like the feminine cycle. And so do you think about, or do you have any, I don't know how to phrase this question, but it's something that I'm always curious about and thinking about. How can we help shift the narrative around expectations that have been largely built from a masculine lens and in a masculine way? And there's this expectation that it will maintain its masculine nature.
Right.
Do you think there's a way for us to help shift that? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. I do wish I had a better answer. I can tell you where I am in that conversation because it does cause a lot of I think generally it creates a lot of powerlessness and helplessness when you look out, especially at a point right now. We have small group of people leading a huge amount of people. Um, there's no access. It's not like we live in 100-person tribe, and when you have an issue, you can go to the leader and be like, "Hey, something's off." You can post it, you can blog about it, we can talk about it in here, which I think is very important. As long as we're talking about it, to not be silenced. Ultimately, though, I do find that each one of us has to find a space that feels balanced and comfortable, where you are pushing what feels right and true to you, while also not completely severing from the society, because that's kind of on the other side too of saying, you know what, F everybody, I'm gonna cut ties and just go live in Mars. there's this tension to be held between being a part of while also being an individual, being a one in the part. And that's a very difficult thing to find for me. To what extent do you recycle without making your entire life about recycling? To what point do you take care of nature and the animals without being hyper vigilant about which ant you're going to step into? There's a point, there's a sweet spot that I think each person does need to sit down and think about, where am I in this? What feels good for me and why? Um, and just have a clean conscience about it. None of us are saints. We all sin a little bit here and there, some more than others, but it's also about how you carry that on a daily basis. So I think it's very different to I think it's very different for each person on how to carry this conflict, um, and how to also carry the action. Is it do we are we starting to wear these savior complex roles where we want to go and save the planet, but we're completely losing ourselves in the process? And then that becomes counterintuitive as well. Or are we also completely ignorant and not ignorant, but in denial of what is happening because it's so incredibly overwhelming? That's the other extreme. So to find a spot in the middle, I think it's very, very difficult. I struggle with that. And the best that I can do is give it a space to feel it and to talk about it, and come to terms with, well, what's my part in this? What am I willing and what can I do? What am I capable of doing? And also, how do I continue to also respect my life and my family and my role as a mother, as a wife, as a daughter, sister, etc.? So I think it's a hard question. I think it's a really difficult question.
Yeah.
I feel like what this conversation makes me think about is the tagline of Teresa's old show was that it's the weekly antidote to the patriarchy. And I feel like there's more and more conversations happening now about what is matriarchy, right? And this, what is it? People are talking about the bonobos, right? And the way that they have lived in a matriarchal society forever. And also historically, if you keep going back, there were more matriarchal communities. And so this is something that I like to explore, or I'm starting to explore. But again, I feel like to go all the way to the other side, right? Like when the pendulum is swung so far towards the masculine and the patriarchal values or society that we're living in, like how, I don't know, sometimes the pendulum has to swing all the way to the other side before you come back and find the balance in the middle.
Yes. I love that image, Jennifer, because I do feel like we're kind of swinging a little bit to the other side. Maybe not in the way that we envisioned. I remember when I was younger, that swing would have looked like having a female president and everyone having great healthcare, and everyone just caring for each other. And that's not exactly where we are. I'm not sure if there's a lot of observation for me that to notice the patterns, to sit down and have enough inner strength to observe, to witness what it is that is happening. Um, that in itself for me is very difficult, to be able to say, hey, we're swinging to the other side here, and nobody has the answer. Holding that. Because I do think that in the witnessing, there is a container that begins to be formed, and it does begin to hold, all right, well, if it's already on too far to the left, and we don't want it to go too far to the right either, then what does in the middle look like? But that would take a conversation. That would take people sitting down in the same room for extended amounts of time with, and again, enough ego strength to not be immediately threatened by the other, shutting down and saying, screw this, I'm leaving. We're not having conversations about this as much. People get very heated up very quickly, very radicalized. Everything does get personal because it is personal. But there is something to be said about the staying and the witnessing and the containing, because that's also when transformation happens. It happens under tremendous, like a diamond, it happens after tremendous amount of pressure and heat. It doesn't happen just by someone people pleasing their way into change. So we move a little bit into the masculine again in that way. With we're holding both, to be able to fight for what you believe in, but also give space for what the other wants to bring in as well. Um, so I think that there's the essence of this huge swing is that there is a lack of valuing in the conversation and the staying in the conversation and the listening. So we keep just, if it's not you, oh, now it's me. Okay, now it's you. Okay, now it's me. Well, can we both just sit down and fight about it? Let's fight about it, but let's stay without killing anyone. You know, of course, that part's important.
Yeah,
I'm
it makes me
thinking,
think of, oh, go ahead, Jennifer.
I was just going to bring in an example of something that I learned about. I went to a retreat where the Yawanawa people were here from Brazil, and they're an indigenous culture who lives in the jungle, and they had more traditional male and female roles in their society until this one woman was like, wait, I want to be a medicine woman. I want to be a shaman. I want to bring my voice to the ceremony. And so she went off on her journey and did the work. And she became the first female shaman. And the songs that she brought back had more harmony and more melody. And traditionally, the men were the only ones sitting in ceremony and singing their songs the way that they sang it. And now, in the Yawanawa people, the women are also sitting in the same ceremony, and the men are singing their songs, and the women, and they somehow broke through that. And I wanted to ask, like, how did you do that? How did the men say, yes, please come in? I'm sure they weren't like, of course, please come in. We've been waiting for you, right? I'm sure there was a lot of tension and a lot of like conflict that they had to go through in order to get to the other side. But that's kind of just the story that's coming up as you're saying. Can we just sit and listen and be with each other instead of just, immediately pushing against?
Yeah.
One
Yeah.
of the things that it brings up is thinking about how women, and now we're talking gender or we're talking biology, and women have fought to be doing the same things that men have done
Right.
historically. The thing that I see that's disturbing or unsettling is that what that means is we have begun to act masculine. And in order to be successful, and Jennifer and I talked about this on our episodes when we talked about our heroine's journey and how you're essentially taught to assimilate to the masculine culture in order to succeed. And that to be a soft manager or a nurturing manager, isn't actually what's valued in society. And so that's where, my curiosity is always in that space of how can we change our value system? How can women or men show up to work or to parenting, holding both the masculine and the feminine within, when we live in a society that is exceptionally valuing, and I shouldn't say all of us are, but when we have a very fierce government that is using hyper masculine practices of war and force and harm, it's almost like I feel like they're trying to condition us to accept this more, to value it more, when that's the opposite of what I hope to see in the world. And yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. There is a lot of force. I think we're living in an era where there is a lot of force, and here we are talking about conversations, and I don't know if that's possible when we're on the other end of this massive metal fist. Um, there is it does get aggressive, it does get violent. I mean, we're humans, we do have the tendency towards a lot of violence, and there is something that I have seen, you just feel the energy. People are getting energized, they're getting radicalized, there is this feeling of wanting to push back. um I mean, with any war, I'm not an expert in war or any sort of that kind of a topic, but you do see what that when there is war, there is kind of like a tectonic plates, something shifts profoundly, and then things fall apart, and then there's something else that establishes as new. Um, it's incredibly violent. That part I have a lot of feelings about. It's incredibly violent, and it comes at a cost of a lot of people, a lot of innocent people, a lot of children. We get into the areas of humanity that I don't know if we really know how to digest that in such a collective level. This is just like trauma happening, and we're witnessing it happening, and we're all getting um, also traumatized from viewing all of these things. Um, I was going to go to this other point, and I completely blanked after I spoke about that. All these images came back up from, you see social media, and it's like, oh my God. Um, the not being silenced, I think, is important.
Yeah.
The still bringing it up, the even if you get trampled over, the getting back up and you continue to talk. I think this is the part that becomes difficult, because not all of us can go out on the street and protest. Really, not everyone can do that. But then how are you doing it in your own way? Do you stay silent in conversations whenever you think in a different way? There is so much courage that has to come up in a moment where it's getting tremendously um, destabilized. I remembered what I was going to say. When COVID hit, I think it was very violent as well.
Mm.
And people had to get on Zoom, and you had to, everyone was looking at their kids and the chaos and the dog. Women especially were having a tremendously difficult time, because then they couldn't balance any of it. Kids were staying home from school, everyone was going crazy. And a lot of people died. A lot of people died in COVID as well. I think that collectively we all, through the entire world, went through that. But something interesting happened afterwards, which was that people started dividing their time between working from home and going to the office, and that opened up the possibility to do caring for the kids in a different way, or to go do groceries, to work out, to pay attention to you. We became efficient in different ways, which also, you also get in the car less, pollute less. There was something beautiful, I think, that came from that, in the adjustment of how we present ourselves in this just whirlwind of productivity. And I don't want to forget that, because even though I never want to go back to COVID, and it was a great deal for everybody, um, it opened up something in people that brought in a completely different energy that I don't know if it would have been able to come in as um, in such a balanced way, because it was everywhere at the same time. We don't get those kinds of changes all that frequently.
I agree. I at the time I was referring to it as like the great elimination diet for our culture, because so much of it was taken away that it was an opportunity to rebuild, I
Yeah.
felt. And it's interesting because who knows what the spectrum is, who knows what the timeline is, but if you think about like what we've come out of that with, wasn't the utopia that I was hoping that we'd land in, right? That suddenly we appreciate our time for ourselves and we don't have to be hyper productive and working. But it felt like it makes me think about the security of the masculine and how it does make us feel safe. And it's almost like we had to go back to those structures because even though they may not be helping us, they still felt familiar and safe to us. So much of society went back to those masculine structures for that reason. And I guess it's out of my control as to what we can do to try to retain some of that within ourselves, other than, I have those sort of grand ideas where it's like something we can do, something Jennifer and I can do on our shows just to help everyone understand this, and it'll change everything. And it's just a reminder that it's coming back to me. Am I doing it in my own life? And if all of the billions of people were changing their relationship to the masculine and the feminine in their own life, or however we want to call it, like that to me would have a profound impact. But it's hard when we're doing it in silos or we're doing it alone without community and feeling supported in that way. So I think having conversations with folks like you, it's furthering that community. Even if it's a digital online community, it's furthering that community, which gives me hope.
I'm with you on that. I mean, and I don't know if either, Jennifer or you, Teresa, have felt this, but I have found that since the world broke into flames, people are scared. And then of course, there is the scattering, but I have also seen this kind of tightening, this holding, like tucking in community. You hear so much of the media and you see all the images, and a lot of that is AI, and then you go outside and you look at the world also, the sun keeps on rising, and not everything is complete chaos. I find that there has been more of a valuing of connection. I find it incredible that as of now, I mean, and this is probably just in my immediate community, but I have very few people that I meet via Zoom. Most people want to come in person. And so there is also a reconnecting, because with COVID, of course, everything went via Zoom. And now I'm seeing this coming back to the personal, to the like literal, the carnal of being in the same space as somebody else. And that for me is a tiny, tiny little light amongst a massive black storm. But that's all I have to hold on to, and I will. And that will be also part of how I reconnect. That will be my own responsibility of not, like we were speaking before, of going to the extremes. That will be my way of finding, let me hang on to something here. I will still speak up. I will still show up. I still don't agree with a lot of the things that are happening. And yet I'm not letting go. I'm here.
Mm-hmm.
That to me is important to hang on to.
Yeah. And I love that you brought that in, because I feel like if you only watched the news, right, and only, I guess people don't watch the news anymore, but if you only like looked at what you're being told on the internet and mainstream media, you wouldn't have the perspective that you're sharing about like, well, no one's talking about on the news that there are people that are more interested in being together in person. And that just feels more alive than ever, right? People going to retreats and people going to dinner together, right? All of these sorts of things where we are craving more of that face to face, skin to skin kind of connection, which I think from what I'm seeing too is as AI becomes bigger and bigger and greater part of a lot of people's day to day, that there's also the backlash to that. That's already, I feel, starting to happen, which is along those same lines of how can you show up more authentically in your messiness as a real human, right? And that human connection. I do hold out this hope as well that that's where we'll begin moving to, even in smaller pockets, but across a wide range of geography, right? There will be all these little pockets of people that are already coming together in that more human way. And that, I feel like, is the way that we continue forward just in the interim, but also how we build something greater for the future too.
Yes. Yeah, I have this image of like a droplet of water. If it kind of the water sticks together, right? I forgot what the property is called, but it does that. And if you smear it, it goes everywhere. But then you get other little droplets of water. It's cohesive. It does become cohesive in different other pockets.
Mm-hmm.
So there is the grief of we don't belong to the same drop of water anymore, but it's not all smeared and it's not all meaningless. There other little droplets also form around that. And I think in time, right, there is the tendency to come back to the center, to the whole. But there's something huge in being able to still have meaning and purpose in your immediate surroundings. We got very used to the whole globalized society deal, and we still have each other. There's a ton of people on the earth.
Mm-hmm.
There's still a lot of people to connect to.
From your website, you have some information about some more recent work that you've done. In 2022, you did some qualitative research on the inner lives of men. And in 2025, you contributed to an academic anthology titled Men as Creators and Subjects Across Disciplines and Cultures, which makes me curious about the interest in that subject matter and if you feel comfortable talking about any of that research.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that research came, I'm going to use Jennifer's image of the pendulum because it was after working so much with the feminine. Yes, it doesn't have anything to do with women specifically, and yet women are a massive symbol for it.
Right.
And of course, these groups that I would go to the retreats, they were all women. So there was a very womanful phase for me that by the time I got to my graduate degree, I was really swinging to the other side. And I had also had my son because I had a daughter, an older daughter, and then I had a son who it puts a lot of things in perspective. It puts a lot of things to have a daughter and then to have a son. You begin to relate to life in completely different ways. And so I think that research was a response to having a son, but underneath that there was that pendulum that was hitting all the way to the other end. And I wanted to see, and this was also, I think we were on the outskirts of the Me Too movement. Um, so I was really interested in understanding how men were reacting in that era. I think we're still a little bit in that era, not as harshly, as aggressively as we were a few years ago. But I was interested in understanding more. And I interviewed, I think I had about 12 men. I was lucky that I got different perspectives from around the world. So it wasn't um, too heavy on just the United States. And it was I felt very passionate about that study, to be able to dig a little bit deeper into, of course, we get again into that gender where, well, it's not just men. There's a lot of questions. There was a lot of topics in there that you could say women also face in the same way that when I was working more with women, well, men face the same things. But it's a different way of languaging. The words that are used are different. So I came out with a few themes that I don't have them all in the top of my head. It's been a few years, but one of the themes that I found was how much the population that I worked with, which was a small, but we went in depth, was this reliance on a female figure to channel the inner life, to channel the emotional life, how difficult it was to create a space that was purely amongst men and talk about deep things, about things that were vulnerable, that are fragile. And some of them spoke about even though that there were groups of men that got together, it was only one or two that was able to get into the vines, into the mud with the fellow male. And actually, that male was he was gay, and he was also, I think he was a psychoanalyst, I believe, in training. So he had that prompting of, how to do it, and he was in a leading position of creating those kinds of spaces. But other than him, I felt concerned, to be honest. In we are Men are also victims of the patriarchy. Men are having a very difficult time talking about what it is that they're going through without being faced immediately with this backlash of like, yeah, well, you've had years of being at the top and now it's our turn. And um, it's not a conversation anymore. And so there was some of in the study of just giving them the space of like, well, what's going on here? How did we even get here? What do you have to say? And they were all very honest conversations. They were incredibly meaningful to me. I learned a lot. And the other theme that I found interesting, I think this was towards the end. My memories are a little bit fragmented. It was towards the end. I had a conversation with one of the participants who, I think towards the end, I was always asking, well, how can we bring up these topics more? What can we do as this is not just as women, but like all of us? What can we do? And he said, well, I think we should change the way we refer to this, because when you talk about the inner life of men, like that just I can't remember exactly how he said it. It was like it's too mushy, Like I don't want to talk about that. And I came back to the film of like, well, how are we supposed to talk about this then? And I asked, well, what would you like? How should we call this? And he couldn't come. Granted, I put him on the spot. He couldn't really come up with anything that would refer. But the essence of the thing is mushy. It is sticky. It's not something that's a clean cut. Here's a little box for you to store in your storage of boxes. And so I came back, to this theme that I worked on the film of it's difficult to talk about the thing that doesn't have a name. So we give it a name, but the name doesn't quite capture the thing that we're talking about. So let's get rid of the name, but now we can't talk about it anymore. So this, I faced again in that study, which I thought to be very accurate and very prominent in just any sort of inner life conversations. So it was a very meaningful and thought-provoking study, and the male as creators, it was kind of a follow-up of that as well, just with developing a little bit more of that thought just from my own perspective. But it was also a life-changing project for sure.
I don't know if I started reading this book, The Creation of Patriarchy by Gerda Lerner. And I mean, it's made me think more. It's helped me to get more into this mindset of the ways that the masculine shows up in society. And when we have all of the very, I guess, pervasive structures or formidable structures that we live within, I'm sure all of them have been constructed by a man who's been culturally conditioned to act and think in a masculine way. It's so hard to imagine like what it would have been like if women had been the creators, and women who had permission to embody the feminine principles that, you know, this is up for debate whether or not women embody them more naturally, or if that's just been a culturally developed thing for women to be the nurturers and to be soft, etc., all those feminine principles. But to imagine like what would our legal system look like? What would the government look like? What would schools look like? What would medical care look like if it had been completely just designed from a feminine perspective? And I can't imagine it. I don't even know how it would be. And maybe it's not fully created, but at least done in balance with the masculine, because the masculine has to be the structure. But if the feminine was allowed to be more present in those structures. So I just find it really interesting to think about really that impact of the masculine on society, and men as the embodiment of the masculine for the most part, as the creators of everything. And so is that I didn't have a chance to read the 2025 anthology that you put together, but if you could just talk a little bit, I'm sort of connecting those thoughts about the creation of the patriarchy to that work that you did as a part of that anthology. And so I'd just be curious to know what really you were uncovering in that, and your peers were uncovering in that process of that work.
Yeah, well, going back to what you were mentioning on envisioning what it would be like to have a culture where we did have more feminine first laws and just platforms. And I do think that when I was working on the film, there was a time where I really idealized, oh my gosh, we need more women, we need more feminine, we need so much more of this, and this will really change everything. Um, but really, when you go again, you get unbalanced, and then you get into a space where I'm sure we've all had experience with organizations where it's very non-hierarchical, but then like nothing ever gets done, and you don't really get paid all that much, but it's great because the people are wonderful, but you have to wait like 2 weeks before you get the email back. And um, that's where you really start missing a little bit more, some more rules or some more boundaries. And there's something to be said about the age that I was in as well. I mean, I was in my early 20s. Literally, my brain had not even fully developed yet. And I was swinging hardcore left and right. Um, as I grew old, you see more, you experience more, and then you have your own kid. I think the kids really accentuate a lot of things. I really started to move into the balance of what does this mean when I was doing the work with the men. It's interesting because another thing that came up a lot was how the pressure that men receive from men, in the same way that how people joke about how only women judge how other women look more so than the men. In that same way, men create a good bit of pressure for each other. And it's all about productivity. It's about being the breadwinner. It's about being at the top. And you throw in a good bit of you throw in a mix of testosterone into the bowl, and you have a little more aggression. You have a little bit more discrimination that happens amongst that. But when you look into the individual, many times the individual didn't necessarily want that. A lot of it can be from the research that I did. Well, it's what I want is a partner. And women value success. Women value having nice homes and not having to work. And I want a wife. And so this is what I need in order to have a family. And there's a sacrifice that happens that also gets mixed in with status. It gets mixed in with people applauding everything you do. And so it's no longer a clear, let me just step over everybody so that I can be the leader. Of course, there's power in that. But when you track it down and you track it deeper, it does come from what I researched, right? I mean, I can't speak for the entire male population. It comes from this yearning for connection. And when you can't, when all the doors are closed of connecting in more feminine ways, well, here's a very clear path as to how to connect in the masculine way. And that means become the CEO of whatever and fire a bunch of people and um, sleep with a bunch of women. And there's a very clear path that has already been marked. I'd be interested to hear what you learn from the book that you're. I don't know if you're reading it or if you finished it.
No, I just started reading it, and yeah. So
Yeah,
I don't know, but I mean, her main philosophy is really that, the patriarchy, and which may be obvious to us. I think the book was written in like the 70s. Um, but that the patriarchy is a cultural phenomenon. It's not based in biology, but a lot of men largely used philosophies, both religious philosophies and like Aristotle. I forget, there some other major philosopher kind of had philosophies about a woman's role and how women were inherently inferior, and that is why men then took over and did all that they've done to control things. And so her philosophy is that if it can be created, it can be undone through an understanding of how it was created. So that's where
yeah,
my curiosity goes.
yeah. There's one part that I see underneath that, which is this aspect of how, if you go into very traditional settings of gender roles, there is very much that devaluing of women. And yet, underneath that, there is a huge reliance on women to take care of the emotional life of not just the man, but the family. So it's an unspoken valuing. It's in the shadows, right? Of yes, you're less than, but also I feel profoundly inadequate. Please validate me. Please look beautiful because gosh, you are a reflection of what I should be carrying inside. So you do it outside and then you cover it for the both of us. And that's a that's a worrisome position to have when a lot of these men have so much power, um, because then we're not talking about actual strength. You're just talking about a reaction, compensatory behavior, and then we're not parting from a space that comes from like a centered. This is what I want for society. This is what's best. This is very much a me, like how do I compensate for what I don't have. And it's, you move away from the collective, you move very much into that individual person. It's worrisome that a lot of men that do have a lot of power don't necessarily have that inner strength, and you can see it in the way that they behave. A true patriarch, if we go into very idealistic again models, takes a role of a father. A father protects, a father teaches, a father creates scaffolding for the children to be able to be adaptable in the real world. And so we don't have that archetype of the father in these men that have positions of leadership. A lot of men do, uh, but not a lot of the ones that have the most amount of power. Um, and what I found in my research, those the theme of I can't access this part of me, not without a woman. But then again, the women that are chosen are not necessarily the women that have the capacity or the training or the background or the interest in the emotional life either.
Mhm.
So you have both men and women in very robotic, uh, positions of just productivity and money making. And again, we move away from the gender, right? Because it's women are in there too, very much so. They're behind the scenes. You don't see them, but they're right there.
Mhm. This is making me think about another conversation that Teresa and I and other friends have a lot is there is this swelling, I feel, at least in the people that I'm in community with, of women who are becoming more self-aware and working through their shadow, right? And doing this work to say, like, okay, how can I have a bigger role? How can I become more whole? And in that, there is this, I think it's a reaction from the men, right? Where they're like, wait, where are you going? Like, we're supposed to be staying here. What are you doing? Where are you going? And so this idea of like, what is the responsibility of the woman to be like, "Oh, I gotta go. I don't have time to carry you with me. Or is it like, wow, if we're going to do this, we have to do this all together. So I need to put in the effort and help you get to where we're going together. And I see a combination of in my circles of women who are like, no, I have no time for that. And then the other women who are like, we have to go together. You know, this whole idea of like, what's our responsibility in this?
Totally. I love that you brought that up. Um, it just for me, it just so depends on the attitude of
Mm,
those two people that are having this hypothetical conversation. Um, because let's suppose that the woman is the one who is trying to move forward internally and becoming, letting herself expand in the way that she was meant to be, the person she was meant to be. And we have this partner, this male partner, who is trying to hold her back because of insecurities, because of fear, because of trauma, because of whatever. And then she's the one that, it is unfair. If she has more growth, if she has more development, if she has more maturity, inevitably she's in a position of power.
mm,
She's in a position of power where she can choose, do I want you to see what I see or not?
mm,
Um, and then the male, the partner, whoever this imaginary man we're thinking of, we would also have to bring in how he reacts to being in a position of less power. Are you going to be violent? Are you going to hit her? Are you going to pull her by the hair and drag her across the room? Or are you going to be able to sit down and have a conversation about what you need? What is it that you need in this? Maybe you just need you need more hugs. I don't know. You need to talk about your father. You need more male communities because you miss what she has and you don't have this in your version. But can you hold that void without becoming violent, without becoming aggressive? For me, again, very personally, if I do find an attitude of openness and I want, it's in me to want, of course, I'm also a wife of a husband and a daughter of a father and a friend of a guy, of a man, a mother of a son. I want to still hang on. I want them to come along. If it starts getting violent, either intellectually, emotionally, or physically, then you have to let go. And then that is, again, a very masculine stance. This is black and this is white. No, I will not go around with bruises around my neck and fear for my life. I'm not expanding anymore. That's just not being able to let go. So it depends a lot for me in the attitude with which this is being faced in each individual. I don't know if there's a standard, yes, we should leave the men behind, or no, we should bring him with us. I think, we should bring the good ones. As well as the women, we should only bring the good ones.
I forget what we were exactly talking about, but Jennifer and I were, I guess, talking about relationships, probably personally, and as Jennifer's alluding to, conversations with other women friends. And we were like, if only we could find a couples therapist who understood the masculine and the feminine, who could come on the show and talk to us about how couples need to relate to their masculine and feminine embodiment and help figure out the puzzle that works for them. And then we went to your website and you were like, couples therapy. I was like, she's going to help us understand this. But for me, it brings up, I also have a son, and I will say, when I was a sales manager in a very masculine world of technology, and I was a lawyer, very masculine energy field, and I embodied the masculine, I thought, very well. And when and I brought in the feminine in certain ways. Like, my style of management was nurturing and not like competitive, hyper competitive. But I will say, once I had a child, I felt like suddenly my husband and I became the archetypes of like fierce, masculine structure, boundaries, punishment. And I was like the soft, loving mother, fluid, all this stuff. And I'm like, what? That's not the way that my husband and I, if I'm just being very open publicly here, related previously. He didn't embody that person. I never would have thought he's an introverted writer. He didn't carry those masculine qualities on his chest. But once we had a child, I felt like it completely changed. And I slipped much more into the feminine that I think I previously was. And so it's been an interesting journey for me to notice that, how easy it is to fall into those archetypes, and also how hard it is, perhaps more difficult for men, to step out of the masculine archetype without having role models of men who do embody both the masculine and the feminine. And so it's sort of like the automatic, shift just into the masculine, because that's what's known and that's what's been modeled for years. So I don't know that there's a question in there, but just reflecting how it's been really profoundly interesting to observe that in my family, and how I just see it even beyond my family. I see it so much more pronounced in government and elsewhere. And it's been hard for me to I guess shift it. And again, going back to sort of something that I said earlier, to have hope for, if I can't change it in the micro of my family and the dynamics of my relationship, how can I hope that these bigger systems, these bigger containers, can shift in that way?
I think I share that experience as well, of having children. It was more on the kids when I had just done this film on the feminine, and I had just made sure that everybody understood that this was not about gender. And then I had my daughter, and she goes towards the most, the princess. And it was during the time of the Frozen craze. And I was like, I will not fall into that. And I love those songs now. Now they're in my own playlist. And then when I had my son, I thought, you know what? I have enough toys. I will not buy more toys. We have so many toys. And sure, he played with them, but I remember vividly, he got invited to his first birthday party, to this friend of mine who has boys only. So their house was full of trucks and boy toys. And the way that saw my baby infant son just light up, and just the admiration of the wheels, and it was so undeniably in front of me, that it really makes you think. It makes you think a lot. Is this truly all just nurture? Is it all truly just these created societal norms? Um, what I've come to terms with is, I do feel like, even though there may be, let's say that there is nature in this, in ways of being. At the end of the day, we have different bodies that it just, to say that they're completely the same would be as wrong to say that they're completely different. There's something to be said about what we have, what we have been given by nature. Um, but there's a lot. We do also have this amazing capacity. We don't have our claws. We don't have it in nature. We don't have like camouflaging. We don't really have much, but we have this frontal lobe that allows us to think further, to bring awareness into what it is that we do, and it gives us choice. So, all right, let's go there. Let's say that this is something that nature gives us. Well, do we want to behave like this? Is this what we want? Um, and I think for a long time it worked. As long as everyone was fulfilling their role and everyone was, it worked. It continues to work for many families. The thing is that it doesn't work for everybody. And so again, well, what is it that you want from this brief life that we get on earth? Do you want to cook all day? Well, then gosh, go for it and wear your princess outfit and listen to Frozen all day long. Um, you can certainly do that, man or woman, right? But I feel like, what when you're speaking about that, Teresa, and I come from also relating to that picture that you painted in a very personal way. It came back to me as to, well, I have it in me. Clearly I have it in me to go both ways. I have the role models, and I have all the neural connections to be the mother that I was given as well, that my grandmothers were. Do I want to do that? And if not, then what is it? What direction do I want to take this thing into? In a way that feels true to me, in a way that I'm honoring everything the potential that I carry alongside with my limitations and my husband's. But it's interesting that the kids come into the play, and as I was hearing you speak, I was imagining, well, gosh, the kinds of conversations you must have had with your husband, right, about these things, and how this child comes in, and you speaking with your husband is already, just having that conversation, it's already destabilizing. It's already, something is shifting, something new is coming from this, from whatever it is that you had before. It's not what it is now. And it's not what you had, and it's not what you thought it would be. But then what is it? Um, I think that there's some magic in that.
We're in the feminine. We're in the feminine phase.
Yes, yes, we are.
Well, I feel complete, at least for now. I mean, there's so many more places that we could go to, but being mindful of the time. I don't know, Jennifer, did you have any lingering questions?
No, I don't. I loved this conversation in all the different ways that it winded and wrapped. But leave it to you, Lorís, if there's anything you want us to end with, or ways that people can find out more about you. We can leave a link to the movie, because I would love for more people to see the movie. But if there's anything else that you have to add or close with.
Um, I'm not sure there's anything else to add. I'm very grateful to the both of you, to prompting me. I'm gonna go like run a marathon or something. I feel very energized. It was a very joyful conversation for me. I deeply enjoy talking about these things, as you can probably tell, and so I really appreciate the invitation. And I mean, my doors are open if whoever watches the film, to talk about it, right? Because this is an old film, so there's a lot of new things that have happened since, and I'm very open to continuing the conversation.
Yes, Jennifer and I have been, we had been scheming about doing like a big kind of in person event. And we were like, maybe we'll screen the film there. So we'll see how things evolve. But
It
I'm
would be
I'm really, really grateful for all of your work, and I look forward to digging into some of the writing. I haven't had a chance to go more into your writing, but I look forward to that. and to future conversations.
I will cheers to that.